Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
8:09 a.m. Tokyo. Monday morning, March 20th, 1995. The Kasumi Gaseki Station platform is deep beneath Japan's government district. A salaryman in a dark suit steps onto the Hibiya Line train, newspaper under his arm, coffee in hand, another typical commute. The doors close, the train lurches forward. Then someone on the platform starts coughing, then another, then screaming. Inside the train car, a man slumps to the floor, foaming at the mouth. A woman's vision goes dark. Complete darkness at 8:10 in the morning. A businessman tears at his collar, gasping, his pupils shrunk to pinpoints. The train doesn't stop. It keeps moving toward the city center, carrying its cargo of dying passengers to station after station, spreading invisible death with every door that opens. By 9 a.m., St. Luke's International Hospital would be overwhelmed with nearly 500 patients. By noon, 5,000 people would flood emergency rooms across Tokyo. 13 would die. Some would never fully recover. 5 men with plastic bags wrapped in newspaper had just executed the deadliest chemical weapons attack on civilians in modern history. They weren't soldiers. They weren't foreign terrorists. They were Japanese citizens, doctors, scientists, engineers, members of a religious cult that believed they were preventing the apocalypse by triggering one. This is the story of how educated people convinced themselves to murder strangers on a Monday morning, and why the authorities who could have stopped them chose to wait. Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. I'm Richard Backus, and today we're exploring one of the most disturbing terrorist attacks in modern history. A day when nerve gas turned Tokyo's subway system into a war zone, and when Japan confronted an enemy it never expected, its own citizens. To understand what happened on March 20th, 1995, we need to go back to the beginning, to understand who Aum Shinrikyo was, and more importantly, who its members were. Shoko Asahara, born Chizo Matsumoto in 1955, was partially blind from birth. He founded Aum Shinrikyo in 1984, initially as a yoga and meditation group. The name means supreme truth. Asahara blended Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, and yoga into a unique apocalyptic doctrine. His core belief was simple and terrifying. The world was heading toward Armageddon, and only Aum members would survive. But here's the first truth we need to hold. Aum Shinrikyo wasn't a group of uneducated, desperate outcasts. It attracted some of Japan's brightest minds. Masami Tsuchiya, who would become the chief sarin producer, had a master's degree in organic chemistry. Seiichi Endo holds a Ph.D. in molecular biology. Ikuo Hayashi was a senior medical doctor. The cult recruited heavily from Japan's top universities, Tokyo University, Waseda, and Keio. By 1995, Aum had about 10,000 members in Japan and 30,000 in Russia. Why did educated professionals join a doomsday cult? This is where we need to resist the urge for simple answers. Japan in the 1980s and early 1990s was experiencing tremendous social pressure. Economic bubble, then crash, intense workplace demands, and loss of traditional values. Aum offered certainty, community, and purpose. Members practiced bizarre rituals, drank Asahara's bathwater, believing it had spiritual properties, and wore electrical caps they thought synchronized their brain waves with the masters. From the outside, it looked insane. From the inside, it felt like salvation. By the early 1990s, Asahara's teachings had become explicitly violent. He taught a concept called POA, the idea that killing someone who was committing evil deeds was actually saving them from accumulating worse karma. Murder became mercy in this twisted logic. In 1989, Aum members murdered lawyer Tsutsumi Sakamoto, who had been representing families trying to recover their children from the cult. They killed his wife and his 1-year-old son, too. The murders went unsolved. The cult was suspected but never charged. In 1990, Asahara and 24 other cult members ran for seats in Japan's parliament. They were utterly defeated, not winning a single seat. Humiliated, Asahara became convinced that the Japanese government was part of a global conspiracy against him. He began preparing for war. This is where the second truth becomes important. Aum had the resources and expertise to wage that war. The cult was worth an estimated $1 billion. They owned legitimate businesses, computer stores, restaurants, and a hospital. They had laboratories. They recruited chemists and engineers specifically to develop weapons. In June 1994, 9 months before the subway attack, Aum carried out a test run. In the city of Matsumoto, 322 kilometers northwest of Tokyo, cult members drove a converted refrigerator truck into a residential neighborhood and released sarin gas. The target was a group of judges who were about to rule against Aum in a property dispute. 7 people died. 58 were hospitalized. Among the victims was a woman named Sumiko Kono, who was left in a coma. And here's where we encounter one of the cruelest aspects of this story. Her husband, Yoshiyuki Kono, became the primary suspect. The police and media hounded this man whose wife lay dying. They theorized he had accidentally created poison while mixing chemicals in his yard. He was investigated relentlessly. His reputation was destroyed. For a year, Japan believed Yoshiyuki Kono was the Matsumoto poisoner. He was completely innocent. His wife was a victim. He was a victim. But because the police couldn't fathom that a religious group could manufacture military-grade nerve gas, they blamed an ordinary man trying to tend his garden. Now here's the third truth, the one that should disturb us most. Japanese authorities knew about Aum's involvement in Matsumoto and did nothing. In September 1994, police received tips pointing to Aum. A criminal investigation team analyzed the chemical process for synthesizing sarin and discovered that dummy companies connected to Aum had purchased large quantities of chemical precursors. They found sarin hydrolysis products in soil samples near Aum facilities. They suspected, they investigated quietly, but they didn't act. Why? Japanese law enforcement operates under strict civil liberties protections. Raiding a religious organization required overwhelming evidence. There were concerns about overreach, about violating religious freedom. There were fears that a raid might provoke violence. Aum had hinted they possessed biological weapons, so authorities watched. They gathered evidence, they prepared. While they prepared, Aum prepared too. By early March 1995, Aum leadership knew the police were closing in. A major raid was imminent. They decided to strike first, to create chaos that would distract authorities and perhaps trigger the apocalypse Asahara had been prophesying. The plan was precise and coordinated. 5 teams, each consisting of 2 members, 1 to release the sarin, 1 to drive the getaway car. The targets were 3 subway lines that converged at Kasumi Gaseki Station, the heart of Tokyo's government district. Police headquarters, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the National Police Agency, all within blocks of this station. The teams practiced. They prepared antidotes for themselves. On Sunday, March 19th, they gathered for final instructions. Monday morning, March 20th, 1995, began like any other Monday in Tokyo. The subway system carried millions of commuters. At approximately 8 a.m., 5 men boarded separate trains on the Marunouchi, Hibiya, and Chiyoda lines. Each carried a bag containing a sarin solution wrapped in newspaper. Each carried a sharpened umbrella tip. At coordinated times between 8 and 8:10 a.m., each man placed his bags on the floor, poked holes in them with the umbrella, and quickly exited the train at the next station. Getaway cars were waiting. The liquid sarin began vaporizing. The trains continued moving, stopping at station after station. Every time the doors opened, the gas spread. Passengers collapsed. Some died quickly. Others staggered to platforms, gasping, blind, convulsing. The panic spread faster than the trains. People fled the stations, not knowing what they were fleeing. Was it a gas leak, a fire, an earthquake? No one knew. At St. Luke's International Hospital, the first casualties began arriving at 8:35 a.m. Within 2 hours, the hospital had treated 641 patients. Across Tokyo, 278 hospitals saw 5,510 patients that day. 17 were critical, 37 severe. Nearly 1,000 had moderate poisoning. And here's a crucial detail. About 85% of those who reported to hospitals were what medical personnel called the worried well, people who had psychosomatic symptoms or were simply terrified. Distinguishing between actual sarin exposure and panic became a massive challenge. The immediate response was chaotic, but ultimately heroic. Subway workers, not knowing what they were dealing with, carried victims to safety. Firefighters entered contaminated stations without proper protective equipment. Doctors treated patients while trying to figure out what poison they were dealing with. Within hours, investigators identified sarin, and suspicion immediately turned to Aum Shinrikyo. On March 22nd, just 2 days after the attack, police launched massive raids on 25 Aum facilities. They did it under the official guise of investigating a missing person, a 68-year-old notary public who had disappeared. This legal fig leaf allowed them to enter. What they found confirmed everything. Laboratories full of chemical weapons equipment, large quantities of sarin precursors, and the infrastructure for mass production of poison. Shoko Asahara went into hiding. He was arrested on May 16, 1995, found in a tiny space between walls at an Aum facility, sitting in a meditation position. He denied everything. He claimed his followers had acted without his knowledge. The trials would last for years. Eventually, 13 Aum members were sentenced to death. Asahara himself was convicted in 2004 of masterminding 13 crimes that led to 29 deaths. He spent 14 years on death row before being executed on July 6, 2018, along with 6 other senior cult members. But here we need to hold multiple truths about justice and responsibility. Was Asahara mentally ill or evil? He showed signs of delusion and megalomania. Yet he was strategic, calculating. He built a billion-dollar organization. He planned attacks. The Japanese courts found him competent to stand trial and sane enough to execute. What about the scientists who made the sarin? They were highly educated. They knew what they were creating and how it would be used. Were they brainwashed, or were they true believers? Or were they simply following orders in a hierarchical system? Ikuo Hayashi, the doctor who released sarin on the Chiyoda line, later expressed deep remorse. He testified against Asahara. Did that remorse absolve him? He was still executed in 2018. Naoko Kikuchi, who helped produce the sarin, was arrested in 2012 after 17 years as a fugitive. She was acquitted in 2015 on the grounds that she didn't know about the plot. Did she truly not know, or was she just following instructions without asking questions? Where is the line between innocence and willful ignorance? Now, 30 years later, survivors are still suffering. Medical studies have documented long-term effects, chronic PTSD, vision problems, respiratory issues, and neurological damage. A survey in 2025 found that over 80% of Japanese people feel public memory of the attack is fading. Atsushi Sakahara, a survivor who runs the Sarin Victims Association, has been fighting for 3 decades to keep the memory alive and to secure adequate compensation for victims. Some survivors lost their careers because of their injuries. Some lost their families because of the psychological trauma. And here's perhaps the most disturbing legacy. Aum Shinrikyo still exists. After Asahara's arrest, the group splintered. Some members renounced the cult. Others reformed under a new name, Aleph, and later split again into another group called Hikari no Wa. Japanese authorities still monitor these organizations. They claim to have renounced violence, but they haven't renounced Asahara. Some still venerate him as a spiritual master. The Tokyo sarin attack resonates far beyond Japan. It was the first time a non-state actor successfully deployed a military-grade chemical weapon against a civilian population. It proved that terrorism could be sophisticated, scientifically advanced, and homegrown. After March 20, 1995, security agencies worldwide had to reconsider their assumptions. Terrorists weren't just bomb makers working in basements. They could be PhD chemists with laboratory facilities. They could be doctors, engineers, or scientists. The attack raised profound questions that remain unresolved. When should authorities intervene against a religious organization showing warning signs? The Japanese police knew Aum was suspicious. They had evidence of the Matsumoto attack. But they waited, concerned about civil liberties and religious freedom. If they had raided Aum facilities in January 1995, they would have prevented the subway attack. But would they have violated constitutional rights? There's no easy answer. Aggressive policing of religious groups can lead to tragedies. Think of Waco, where the federal agent's siege of the Branch Davidian compound in 1993 led to 76 deaths. Passive policing can also lead to tragedies, as Tokyo proved. The attack also forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how educated people become radicalized. We want to believe that intelligence protects against extremism. The Tokyo attack proves it doesn't. Smart people can believe terrible things. Education can be weaponized. How do you prevent that? How do you identify when a religious or political movement crosses the line from eccentric to dangerous? In democratic societies that value freedom of thought, on March 20th, 1995, 5 men with plastic bags and umbrellas turned Tokyo's subway into a nerve gas chamber. 13 people died. Thousands were injured. 30 years later, survivors are still suffering from physical and psychological wounds that will never fully heal. The masterminds are dead, executed by the state they tried to destroy. But the organization they built hasn't completely disappeared, and the questions they forced us to confront remain unanswered. Shoko Asahara believed he was preventing the apocalypse. Instead, he brought it to a subway platform on a Monday morning, proving that the most dangerous fanatics aren't the obviously mad. They're the ones who can convince educated, accomplished people that murder is mercy. Sometimes the apocalypse doesn't arrive with horsemen and trumpets. Sometimes it rides the morning train, wrapped in a newspaper, carried by men who believe they're saving the world while they poison it. That's the lesson of March 20th, 1995, and that's why 30 years later we must remember. I'm Richard Backus, and this has been the Daily History Chronicle. If you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe. Thank you for listening, and I hope you will join me again tomorrow for another story from our shared past.